Hey, what's up, you guys? So today we are going to compare and contrast the Orient Kamasu to the Seiko 5KX. Now, these are two affordable, mechanical, Japanese dive style watches, and I think that the Orient is the one to go with. But let me walk you through why I make that decision. I have owned both of these for a while. I have a review of each of these watches in my channel that you can check out if you want a full breakdown of either of these. But today I'm just kind of going to go through and show you what the differences are and why I think the Orient is the winner of these two. So starting with the cases, now the case finishing, they both have high polished sides with brush tops. The bracelets are very similar. I think the case finishing is a tie. And then the case size is really going to be your preference. The Kamasu is slightly smaller. It's 41.5 on the case diameter versus the 5KX 42.5. They're very similar on the lug to lug. The Orient is about 1 millimeter longer with the 47, whereas the 5KX is about 46 millimeters. And they're both about the same thickness. The Orient 5KX is a little thicker, about 13.5 millimeters, versus the Kamasu's 13 millimeters thick, and they both have 22 millimeter lug width. So I think they'd fit I think they both fit pretty comparably on wrist, and I'll give you a wrist shot at the end. The Orient does wear smaller overall, both in size and kind of in height. So if you're on the smaller end of the wrist size, you might go with the Orient. If you're comfortable with the size of the 5KX, which wears just like a SKX, if you've ever worn one of those, you can go with the Orient. So really, that's a matter of preference. The bracelet, these bracelets are virtually almost identical. They're both 3-link. They're both 22 millimeters, and they do taper down to 20 and then back up to 22 millimeters on the clasp. They both feature a double push deployant, just pressed metal, and then they both have a keeper. On the Orient, you have the logo there. The Seiko one is very similar, except they stamped Seiko in the safety clasp, but it's double push deployant with the press middle. And they're both hollow end links. So these bracelets are extremely similar. So really there's no winner here. The one thing I have noticed on the Kamasu, it's one of the things that kind of goes against it, is where this integrates. If you see that the mid link here, as it kind of like will hit this end link, it does kind of put a little mark in the metal there. Not something you would notice unless you were looking for it, but it doesn't seem that the Orient, the Seiko doesn't quite do the same thing. It doesn't look like they've kind of bored away this middle section, so I don't think it's gonna cause the same problem over time. Just a small detail to keep in mind, but the bracelets are very comparable. Now the movements, I'm also gonna say it's a tie here. Now these are both 21,600 beat per hour movements. The Seiko has the 4R36, and the Orient has their newer F6922. And they both have hacking, hand winding, and day-date complications. The reason I think the Orient, it does have slightly better stated accuracy. It's plus 25 to minus 15 versus the 4R36 plus 45 to minus 35. But these are both running pretty well. Generally, the watches will run better than the stated specs. And the reason I'm going to say a tie here is I think the Orient movement is actually better, but it's only been around since about 2016, whereas the 4R36 has been around from about 2011. And correct me if I'm wrong on those dates, but that's kind of what I found doing a little research. So the 4R36 does have a little bit more of a proven track record to be lasting, but I think probably the F6922 is a better movement. And, as they get older, if they're still kicking in 10 years, then I think that is the better overall movement. But based on how long the 4R36 has been around, I gave it a tie. They're pretty comparable movements. The bezel action, so they both have unidirectional 120 click bezels. The Orient has better bezel action. It's smoother and easier to use. And I think it's not 100% perfect alignment, but there's no chapter ring, so overall the alignment looks a little bit better. On the Seiko, and this might be a little bit hard to turn on camera, this was just a little stiffer. It might break in. I've owned the Kamasu slightly longer, but the action just isn't quite as good to me. It's a pretty subjective thing, but I like the action on the Kamasu way better. And then because we do have the chapter ring and the indice and the insert, all three have to be lined up. The alignment isn't perfect. It's not egregious, but I think it's just slightly misaligned, which Seiko's kind of famous for. Um, so I kind of give this one to the Orient. As far as the crystal, that's where you see one of the main differences. Seiko's using their proprietary crystal Hardlex, which I've had good experiences with, but it's not as strong as or as hard as sapphire. And the Orient does have a sapphire crystal. So over the long haul, if you're gonna have a watch that you're gonna wear every day and it's kind of gonna get beaten around, the sapphire crystals generally don't take much damage at all. It's very hard to scratch them. You need something as hard or harder. So sapphire or diamond, basically. So you'll see if you look at pictures of watches with sapphire crystals that are kind of old, a lot of times like the bezel will be all beat up, but the crystal is perfect. So, and that's probably not true of the Hardlex. I'm pretty easy on watches. I haven't really scratched anything other than a Dan Henry, interestingly enough. But yeah, it's just going to go to the sapphire crystal. It's just better than Hardlex overall. Now, there's technically an argument could be made that the Hardlex is more shatter resistant, but I think just from day-to-day use, I'd rather have the sapphire crystal. Now, the dial, this is just going to come down to preference. Seiko did a great job on this orange dial. It's like a shimmery sunburst. And then the Orient has also a sunburst, and it's this really deep red, kind of like a ruby red. But these both come in quite a few colors. The 5KX is going to come in a lot more colors. I think it comes in like 20-something variants, where the Orient has your more standard, well, red's not standard, but they have black, blue, green, and red. And there's probably a couple other colors, but there's going to be less options. But really, this is just your preference. I think both of these dials are really well executed. They play in the light really well, so take your pick on that one. Same thing is going to be true of the hands and indices. Seiko kind of stuck with their SKX style, except they are applied in this case, so you can see that they're edged in like metal there, which makes them, I think, easier to read. It's a little less toolish, a little bit more like blingy, sporty when you have the applied indices, but I tend to prefer applied indices. And then Orient kind of went with their own thing on this one. I do like that they use the triangle at the 12, and they're kind of the 6 and the 9 are squares, but the rest of them kind of have this cool slant to them. And the way they're applied and the lack of the chapter ring, they just kind of float above the dial. So I really like what they did there. It's a little bit kind of they're doing their own thing. But the Seiko indices are really classic, just with the circles with the long ovals. This is really easy to read, and it's reminiscent of that Seiko style. So this is really going to be your preference. The one thing I will note is if you're a stickler like me on the length of the minute hand, the minute hand on the Orient goes all the way out to those indices. So you can see right now it's super easy to tell on the Orient that we're just about at 49, whereas sometimes it's a little bit harder to tell when the minute hand isn't long enough to go all the way out to the indice. But that's just a little nitnoid thing. I don't know if that's going to matter to you guys. I will do a Lume shot. The Lume is quite comparable on these. It's very close. It might even go to the Kamasu, but we'll see how it does in the Lume shot. Water resistance, you only have 100 meters of water resistance on the 5KX. It's one of the main criticisms of this watch is that it lost the screw down crown and the ISO certification, and it lost 100 meters of water resistance, whereas the Kamasu still has 200 meters of water resistance. It's not ISO certified, but obviously it has the stated water resistance is much higher than the Seiko. For me, I mean, this technically goes to the Orient. I don't really care. Don't dive. I don't go underwater. The most water my watches see is maybe washing dishes. So I don't need more than, I think 100 meters of water resistance is going to be good for me. So to me, this is a tie, but technically it should go to the Orient. And then negatives, just things that bother me about these watches after owning them for a while. The Kamasu's crown is much too small, and it is screw down. So when you do unscrew it, it can be difficult to screw back in. And the one thing about screw down crowns is I always kind of get nervous that I'm going to strip them. I always back play them. So it's where you go, instead of going, you turn clockwise to screw them in, but you can back play them and you actually go counterclockwise until you feel the threads drop, and then you can reverse and go clockwise. It's a really good way to not strip your screw down crowns. But then I always have this problem where I can't quite get it. So usually I use my shirt, or I can use this cloth, and then I can get it to go all the way in. So kind of a design flaw in my opinion. I would have loved to see them kind of either widen these crown guards and put a larger crown, or maybe even drop the crown guards and go with a more vintage look. But that is my one and only complaint about this Orient is this crown size. So keep that in mind. The negatives for the Seiko 5KX, now a lot of people are going to say it doesn't have a screw down crown. To me, I actually prefer watches that don't have screw down crowns. I like to be able to just wind in the 0 position, and I do get kind of nervous about cross threading when I'm screwing down a crown. So the fact that it's not a screw down crown, I actually kind of prefer that, but I think most people will consider that a negative against this watch. So overall, the verdict, and then I will give you a Lume shot and a wrist shot, so stick around for that, but I think it has to go to the Orient Kamasu. These are about the same price. Now, the MSRPs on these are about similar, but when you're actually looking at street pricing, these Seikos are dropping. I did get this one for less than $200, kind of like combining a sale coupon with the sale, but they're around $200. And then at the Kamasu, if you're lucky, you can get I got one for about $200, I think, on Joma Shop. So they're about the same price, but on the Orient, you're getting 100 more meters of water resistance and a screw down crown. To me, those aren't super huge deals, but I think for a lot of people, they like to have those 2 specifications. But for me, really why this wins is the bezel action is better, and you get a sapphire crystal. So I think over the long haul, I do plan to own, especially this watch with this red dial. It's very unique. I think I'm going to keep this one for a long time. And it's just nice to have that sapphire crystal, knowing that it'll stand the test of time. But really, if you look at all the specifications, I think you have to go with the Orient. But you could be, I mean, there's an argument to be made for the Seiko. I think these are just kind of the differences. Really, just wear whatever you like and what meets your needs. If you don't really need the 200 meters water resistance and you really like the color of one of the Seikos, go with the Seiko. I don't think you can go wrong with either of these. But for me, I think the Orient Kamasu does win. So I'm going to put these on wrist, and then we'll end with a Lume shot to see who the winner of the Lume is. All right. So there's the 5KX on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. You can see the 46 millimeter lug to lug. It doesn't overhang, so this is going to be a nice size on almost every wrist. It is a little tall, but overall when you wear it, you don't really notice. And I think, those Seiko cases, they always get them right where they're very comfortable and they wear kind of smaller than the dimensions would have you think otherwise. And here's the Orient Kamasu. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to tell from the video, but in person, it does wear smaller than the 5KX. It feels a lot smaller, despite there only being a 1 diameter difference, or 1 millimeter difference in the diameter. Overall, the watch does wear smaller. So I will cut the lights and leave you with the Lume shot. So as you can see, the Seiko there is on the left, and the Orient Kamasu is on the right. And I just cut the studio lights. I didn't charge these at all, and you can see they're both quite bright. The Seiko has a little bit more real estate on the indices, so it does appear like brighter just because there's more surface area there. But I can tell you in person, they're basically the same brightness. So I can go ahead. I'm going to let this delay for about a few minutes, and then I'll give you a shot of it after that time so you can see the lasting power. So it's a few minutes have elapsed, and as you can see, they're both about the same brightness. Judge for yourself, but I'm going to go ahead and declare this a tie. All right, you guys, that's all for this video. Look for another video coming soon, and let me know what you think. Would you go with the Orient Kamasu or the Seiko 5KX? All right, thanks, guys. And if you haven't already liked and subscribed this video, it'd really help me out. Till next time.